actually, before we even get started, I was going to say to you that it's funny to me as I observe you, right, that even though you have this LeBron Jamesian durability, longevity as a personality doing fantasy football, right, you still give off that energy, Sigmund Bloom, that like that you're almost like, does everybody know I'm in here in a sense where like you think it could all end very quickly? Maybe I'm self-projecting a little bit, but am I right that you feel like it at any moment it could be taken away? But even though you've been doing it for hundreds of years already.
Well, I'm thankful. So I won't belabor this story too much, but part of the origin story of Sigmund Bloom is because I wanted to be the play-by-play announcer for the Pirates when I was a kid. I went to Syracuse University, broadcast journalism, because I thought that's how you become a sportscaster. I saw what the business was like up close in the 90s and said, that's not for me. And then circle back around to my first office job, which was at the University of Texas at Austin, doing systems analyst work. And I was spending more time managing my fantasy teams than I was doing my work. And I thought, well, let's try to make this thing that I like doing my work. And I didn't really have the courage to jump out of the airplane and see what happened. And then it was after Black Crowes concert on July 3rd. My brain, is it 2005 or 2006? I'm pretty sure it's 2006. Partly because I'm living in New Orleans, and it's all about that storm that will not be named. I think that was 2005.
And
anyway,
if you can't name years, it doesn't matter. Just like in the Biden interview, they couldn't remember years. As long as you remember dates,
I'm not qualified to be president, I guess, which everyone knew already.
Maybe you are.
And it's a long story, but basically a drunk driver plowed through a crowd of us, and my best friend Jeff Wilson did not make it. I suffered any number of injuries. But my point is, they say, Alan, you could just be standing on the side of the road and get hit by a bus tomorrow, right? I'm here to tell you it happens. It happens. So absolutely, it can all be taken away. Tomorrow's not promised to anybody. And once you really absorb that and incorporate that into how you live your life, hopefully it makes you more grateful. It makes you more present. But it's every day. Every day it's a new challenge to do that, because this world, this plane is hard to stay even keeled on. But absolutely it can be taken away. And that's not a scary thing or a bad thing. It's a thing that should make you savor the moment and be in it.
No, it's both. And I get sad sometimes at night thinking about it, like thinking about how fast, like, it was only yesterday we were growing up like in the 90s, right? With like our text, with 90s hip hop music and little pre-internet. And then, the excitement of the first, technology of phones and video games. And then you just look back and you're like, man, I still have a lot of time left. So, I think about that often. When people ask you, like when you're just, socializing, like, what do you do for a living? How do you actually explain it?
First, I have a sly smile and my eyes do something where people say, oh, this is going to be good.
Right. You have that dilemma, though, like how you explain it depends on who you're talking to.
Right. Well, and sometimes and more, and all the wonderful people who listen to our show and subscribe to Football Guys and all the people I interact with from the fantasy football world have really helped me not feel ashamed of it or feel like I should be doing some real work. But I'll say fantasy football analyst, and some people who are hip to fantasy football will say, wow. And some people who aren't really will say, that's a job? I didn't know that was a job. And that was a common refrain from my law school classmates, because most lawyers are miserable. And when I would run into old law school classmates and they say, what are you doing now? And I said, fantasy football analyst. They said, I didn't know that was an option. I wish I knew that was an option.
Yeah. Depending on who you talk to, the first thing I usually say to someone is, do you know what fantasy football is?
Yeah.
And most people now say yes. 10 years ago, you would get half and half, right? They would say, oh, is that gambling or, right. And then I say, I work for a website that puts out video content and I edit video. And then other people, I just say, oh yeah, I'm a video editor. And then they say, what is that? And then, it's, so I still haven't been able to. So you go right to fantasy football analyst.
And then they always say, and then they always say, Alan, they always say, well, how do you make money doing that?
Right.
How does your website actually make money?
Well, and then my answer, because it's funny, I have the same thing. I always say, well, I was a teacher and I can make at least as much as that.
Sure. Well, I mean, in the nuts and bolts gets down to like selling ads and selling subscriptions and these partnerships and things like that.
Right.
But we are in the age of frivolous jobs. The reality is I shouldn't say there's not enough real work for people to do, because there's all kinds of real work that is not being done. This is where we're really going to go off the rails. But there's not as much work as there used to be. So we have to come up with things, well, to occupy ourselves and each other. Like David Dodds, one of our spiritual leaders, one of the co-founders of Football Guys, would say, we're destroying productivity everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. But like you said, nowadays, like the newer generation, like Generation Z, Alpha, the new generation Alpha, they don't think about work the same way we did. We're like,
Right.
And again, by the way, I think they figured it out better. Like, do you remember when you were sick and you worked in an office, like you didn't even think about staying home. You would be frowned upon if you stayed home with like a heavy cold or something like that.
Well, to be fair, we're old enough to, I started working, you got a sick day. You got 12 sick days a year. You got 12 sick days a year. You got 12 vacation days a year. In addition to working at the university, where you got days that the university was off, you were off. It was actually pretty sweet. So yeah, I would stay home when I was a mental health day. But that was the whole thing of working for the state university and government. But that being said, we also came up when the deal was a kind of a square deal. I think I paid $25 a month for my health insurance.
Right.
And I knew that my job description was going to stay my job description. It wasn't going to be. Now, this happened at University of Texas after I left in the IT department, where like anytime they tell you what do you do at your job, what's your job, what are your duties? Beware, because that means that you're probably going to start doing 1.5 people's jobs. They're just going to lay off a bunch of people, and you're going to have to do more work. So we had a good square deal. But like you said, this new generation is coming around to like, you have negotiating power too.
Yes.
And that's where things went awry in Reagan and the air traffic controllers. I don't know exactly the moment that it happened, but our parents grew up in a world where union meant something different, and unions secured with blood and their life sometimes things that we take for granted.
Yeah, and you see that in sports as well. You see the athlete, who is the modern day worker, right? Obviously, this is on a much higher scale, have a little bit more power. I mean, could you imagine someone like Caleb Williams 15 years ago, 25 years ago, saying, I'm not going to the combine. I'm not going to throw, right? Even no matter how good he was, he'd be, throwing down 10 draft picks. So I like the empowerment of the worker. And it really leads us into our conversation, which I want to talk a little bit about the psychology of free agency a little bit as I form my dynasty rankings. What do you think, for example, like it's been one of the most talked about players in our discords is like Justin Fields, where they're going to trade it. What are the Bears going to do? What do you think is the psychology of, if you're his agent and you're like kind of coaching him along the way, what does he have to be thinking right now?
Oh, I'm going to prove them all wrong. I'm going to prove everybody wrong. Probably what Jalen Hurts thought when he was benched for Tua, and then when he fell to the second round, and then when he had a disastrous end to his rookie year, and everyone was talking about what are the Eagles going to do in the draft. You're going to prove them all wrong, and I think that's what hopefully Cecil and I were talking about this on my stream earlier today. Know that Justin Fields is a leader of the Bears and is beloved in the locker room, so he can secure buy-in from his teammates, and he knows that they've got his back and he's got their back. So it's really just a question of finding a fit where he's wanted. And sometimes you have to make them want you or show them that they should have wanted you. But at this point, to get back to nuts and bolts football stuff, I think we really have to entertain the stronger by the day possibility that he is on the Bears roster with Caleb Williams to open the season.
Yeah, and we've seen this before, right? Do you remember a bunch of years ago where Sam Bradford, I think he was on, he was on a team, he was on the Vikings at the time, and then he got traded for a first-round pick once Carson Wentz got hurt. Is that how it went down?
Teddy Bridgewater. It was when Teddy Bridgewater
got hurt. Yeah. The other way. He was on the Eagles.
Right.
And then, but his value 2 weeks before that would have been a 5th rounder, a 4th rounder.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, if I'm the Bears, I like what they're doing, right? Like they're not 100% sold on Caleb Williams because they haven't seen him work out. They talked to him a couple times, presumably. So there's no rush for them. They're in the power position. Then inevitably, when there is an injury, that's when you say, hey, we have 2 quarterbacks. It's the same thing like your dynasty fantasy football leagues. You wait to trade that player when someone else is in dire need of one.
Yeah, and I think that to put it in dynasty fantasy football terms, I was talking about it and comparing it to real estate, the real estate market right now, how the real estate market is depressed for any number of reasons. Yeah. And so the reality is you can sell something for 10 cents on the dollar now, but if there is a 15% chance that if a certain event happens that has a 15% probability that you can go back to selling it for $1 on a dollar, then you wait. Instead of selling an asset at this depressed cost. Now there's locker room politics. Again, there's this idea that you're bringing in Caleb Williams to be your franchise quarterback when the team is still behind Justin Fields. And that's a real situation to navigate where maybe that predicates giving up Justin Fields for a 5th round pick because you don't want to muddy the water about how this team is going to be composed from a spiritual standpoint. I think that's the part. One of the things we want to talk about, the psychology of free agency. There's a lot of a team is an organism, a shared mass consciousness, and the players you bring in, the players you don't bring in, the players you keep, the players that you let walk, that affects that organism. I know one of the things I saw that was really interesting, and I'm gonna shout out the Packers here for 2 things. Okay, one I saw was they said that the key for Jordan Love getting through his rough patch last year was that the team had his back, that the team believed in him. The team believed in him, and he felt they believed in him, and they were going to stand behind him. And lo and behold, look where we're at now. One of the other really interesting things I saw, Alan, was that S2, I don't even know what they're called now, these processing tests that they do, the Packers said, yes, we pay attention to the results of those tests, not for sorting out or filtering our draft board, but so when we bring a player in, we'll know how we can best support him.
Right. It's more of a guide on how to treat a player. We like our player, and now what makes them tick? What pushes them around, rather than saying, hey, CJ Stroud didn't do well on the S2 test, we're going to take Bryce Young, which it seems like that was a determining factor.
Foolish.
Yes. We're getting the Sigmund boom bump on this live stream, man. 383 people pouring in to see you, Sig. A couple of them said they just came right over from you and Cecil. So thank you for you. In like TV terms, they used to call this a good lead-in.
Yeah, I hope so. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that YouTube is messing around with the number, like how that number is calculated. It's all about juking the numbers.
Yeah.
But I know there's one me and one you, and I see some wonderful people in the chat room. That's the number that matters to me.
Yeah. Well, it's the vanity metrics, right? Like to me, I would have this conversation with you with nobody listening.
Exactly.
I enjoy it. Actually, you know what? I was gonna open up using a term that you're very familiar with. I was gonna call you the love of my life. You know, similar to a term that many of your fans know. And what StreamYard is doing now is they're counting the Twitter viewers live. Yes. That's why you're seeing those enormous
if it scrolls past, maybe. I don't even know.
Yeah, well, it's scroll past. It won't click in, but when they click on it, so even if they click on it for a second, it's there. But again,
welcome to all of you.
Yeah, who doesn't like views and all that kind of stuff? And we all love those vanity metrics. But at the end of the day, I think we just all want to make good fantasy football content, talk to people that we enjoy talking to, and just and not let that type of stuff suck the enjoyment out of it.
Yeah, well, just have human moments where we connect with each other and reinforce each other's humanity and hear and see each other and make people feel a little more comfortable when there are all these forces that are scratching and clawing away at us every day.
I asked you about, like, did you feel like the rug can be pulled out from you with your fantasy football job? What do you think that some of the players that are on the fringe that really haven't proven it, they're sitting there in free agent, what is their psychology? The Clyde Edwards-Hilairs, certainly the Alexander Madison, right? He's out there looking for a job. Do you think those type of players who they're not going to get in calls anytime soon, what do you think the psychology, if you're their agent, what are you telling them?
That's tough. That's really tough. And I don't envy the job of agents. I mean, I know we talk about agents in the bad light often, and that's deserved. But a lot of agents are also much more than agents to these players, right? Depending on what kind of support structures they have in their life. And the agent is often that last person that keeps the ember of hope alive. But the agent also needs to be the voice of reason too. So it's tough, especially if you're a running back. If you're a running back now, the age cliff in the view of teams keeps moving up. What is it now? 28. The teams are like, you're washed up now.
Well, it's not the years; it's the miles too, right?
Sure. Well, either way, you're finding that running backs that used to still be considered viable running backs are being tossed to the curb, or otherwise, you're just looking at, especially from a straight absolute dollar point of view. I thought it was really funny, Alan. We never can dunk on the Cowboys enough, right? I mean, if there's a team that we want to dunk on, we always want to dunk on the Cowboys. And they said that the Cowboys were out on Zach Moss because they didn't want to go past 2 years, $8 million. That was past their comfort zone, which is hilarious when that's what kickers get paid.
And they overpaid Zeke for a couple of years.
Well, and it's just like, really, I mean, in this day and age, whenever is it acceptable to say, yeah, we weren't willing to go past $4 million a year for a player? I mean, the Cowboys are really this cost discipline organization now. Like they're bean counters. No organization in the NFL should be bean counters. So yeah, what do you say to these guys? Well, Alan, I think the other side of it, from a spiritual, emotional point of view, is that all of these guys, with a few exceptions, I mean, there may be some players that from the time they were in 10th grade were going to be NFL stars. Everyone around them told them they're going to be NFL stars, and they've always lived in this world where they had private coaches, they had private coaches, they had all the best training equipment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you mentioned CJ Stroud, and I think one of the keys when we want to reverse engineer, how did we end up with CJ Stroud, is he grew up with his father in prison. I think that they lived in an apartment above like a storage facility. He didn't have all those advantages, and he had to really prove in that camp and elite, whatever, all that stuff when you're in high school. Quarterback, he had to kind of kick down the door to that stuff. It was all him creating that. So what you really have is a belief in self, right? And I think a lot of these players, for them to ever get to the NFL in the first place, had to have that. So I think what you're saying to them is taking them back to that place where they were when they had to overcome, and they all had to overcome, all of them. And well, we're going to overcome this next obstacle too.
What good advice for anyone looking to, maybe, I know you guys get a lot of people asking you all the time, like, how do I get into making fantasy football videos or writing articles? And what good advice right there? Believe in self if you really love it. Because a lot of people say they want to do these things, right? A lot of people say they want to become professional football players, want to become podcasters. But yeah, maybe that belief in self really is the difference. That's pretty interesting right there. Go ahead, Sig.
No, I think that, I mean, one of the things I like to say is bet on yourself, because if you're wrong and you lose, what's the difference anyway?
Right.
But also, this goes back to a conversation you and I were having before we went live about desires and releasing desires and the Buddhist view of the journey that each of us are on. And there's so many ways I could go with this, but it's like, what is it that is driving you? What if it's the end point? If it's some, like you said, vanity metrics or something like that, then you're going to grip so tightly and you're going to miss what the actual path from point A to point B is, because you're going to just be focused on point B. And absolutely, when you have passion, when you love what you do, whenever you radiate with enthusiasm, the joy of participation, that is an attractive quality. And there are sugar highs, there are short-term boosts you can get, but then you have to replace that with another one and another one and another one. And when you radiate with that inner light of satisfaction and contentment and being comfortable in your own skin, like Mark Twain said, I don't lie because I don't have to remember what I said. If you're not lying about yourself, if you don't have to remember what expectations you set that aren't really flowing from your center, then you start to tap into power sources that otherwise would not be available to you.
Now, what you're saying here is, it's resonating, because I see so many people in my life, and I think I might have been guilty of this myself, Sig, is that we stay in jobs or situations to accumulate, to support a lifestyle that we don't even really care about. Meaning, like, you stay in this job you hate so you can buy the expensive car. Go ahead, jump in there.
No. I mean, I'm not trying to cut you off. I mean, I had this experience when this goes back to how I ended up doing this fantasy football stuff, because at a certain point when I was at UT, and I loved all the people I worked with, and I love my bosses, and they were so kind to me. And if any of them are actually watching or listening to this,
caveat, got it.
I love you all.
But here we go. The truth is always after the word but.
But I just thought, is this what I'm going to do? Because everybody was focused on, they had something back then, like the rule of 85, I think it was, where when your years of service plus your age were 85, that's when you could retire. And people were so focused on, like, 22 years when people were retire or something like that. And I thought, well, is this really what my life is going to be? Am I going to spend all this time so that professors can submit their grades on a computer instead of having to go into the office and hand in a piece of paper? Is that really like what I'm going to do? And one of the ways that I tried to motivate myself, because at that time I didn't have children, I wasn't building a family or anything like that, was, well, I just need to come up with things to spend money on. I just need to come up with things to spend money on. And that's where my motivation to go to work will come from. But that's got it all backwards.
Do you remember when people used to wait online for people still do it for like the new iPhone, right? And then for a while it was cool because the new iPhone actually made a difference. But now it's like in the last 10 years, like, oh wait, it's got a better camera. That's it, right? I mean, so basically we stay in jobs or situations. I don't want to just say jobs, relationships, because we think we need to do that in order to support a certain lifestyle, which we don't care about anyway. We're just doing it to impress other people who don't care about us anyway. Meaning, like, most people spend 90% of their day thinking about themselves.
Sure, especially in America.
Well, yeah.
And exactly. people that are engaged in dominant American culture, because there are alternatives. There are community-based alternatives. And I say this as a total navel gazer, self-absorbed person. I'm saying this stuff because I know it too well, because I know myself too well. But there are other people, and down in here in New Orleans, and I've been watching, last night I was watching finally the Algiers America docu miniseries on Hulu about Edna Carr. And like David Grubb, a great New Orleans sport writer, says, like, they should be studying how a school with kids growing up in the harshest conditions with very little socioeconomic support, a public school, a very much predominantly African-American school in New Orleans, won 4 straight state titles, and asking how. And what it is because people are all giving themselves over to be part of something larger than themselves. And I think you see that in other cultures within the United States, of you don't conceive of yourself as an individual. You conceive of yourself as part of a family. You conceive of yourself as part of a neighborhood. You conceive of yourself as part of a church. You conceive of yourself as part of a social aid and pleasure club. You conceive of yourself as part of a marching band. You conceive of yourself as part of a football team. But you're part of something larger that only happens if everybody buys in.
Yeah. No, it's funny though, because when I say we think about ourselves, like if someone shows you a picture that you're in, like a photograph,
I'm looking through the album, I want to see the pictures I'm in.
Where you zoom right in on your picture and you're looking at all different angles of yourself. I mean, there's a picture of 4 people and all you do is it's crazy. How do we break out of that, right? I mean, or is that just normal? Because you can't listen to your own voice on recording. You never like the way you look in pictures. What is that?
I think that's just not growing up.
Yeah.
I think it's just not growing up, and it's okay. And I'm not saying I've figured this all out, folks. And every day you start anew. You might have figured it out yesterday. That doesn't mean it's just going to carry over to today. Every day, I think that we are born into this world with the illusion that we are the center of everything, and the more we grow up, the more we see how we fit into this world where lots of people are the centers of lots of things, and it's not just us. It's part of the reason we feel so lonely too. Right, we create our own prison of ourselves, of our ego, and this just takes me back to, I'm not at kids' birthday parties. Let's say we're not going to have frivolous conversations. I'm the person that within 30 seconds of beginning of a conversation with another parent starts to bring up like the education system and how it's turning people into employees instead of into like souls with fully activated destinies. But I was talking to somebody, I said, one of the things I noticed in New Orleans, again, I'm going to sing the praises of New Orleans, is that so many people in New Orleans are first and foremost, and this comes back to Algiers America and the book Across the River by Kent Babb, which is incredible. They just care mostly about teaching kids what they know. whatever it is they know. That's what they care about. That's what is important to them. And I was talking to other parents, and I've just noticed down here in New Orleans, so many people are so focused on that. And he said, yeah, I think that's when you actually are an adult, when you realize that that's the most important thing.
Oh my God. It's, I'm speechless in a sense where, because I've been thinking about this stuff, you're just able to articulate. Well, you know what? Speaking that, because you are a good speaker, I think that's one, you could acknowledge it's one of your superpowers. What is your favorite medium to produce, fantasy football content, or if you ever decide to do other things, what's your favorite medium?
Yeah, I'm a talker. I'm a
podcast.
Yeah, well, and I mean BS, right? I don't know if you, I'm so used to saying sorry, Joe. I mean, that's what I do, and it's okay. At 48, I'm starting to really now feel more comfortable. Like I said, less shame about, like, that's my place. Other people that's like, other people have other destinies or other things that they're meant to contribute to the world, and what I'm contributing is thinking and talking. I think a lot too much about things, and I talk about things. When I remember somebody that wasn't even that close of a friend of mine, Alan, when I was like middle school or high school, they said, I think you'd be the best person to be stranded on desert island with, because at least I won't get bored, because I'll just, I'm a compulsive talker.
Talk to a coconut.
Right. Exactly. And I love the stream of consciousness of talking. And I think that talking, for me, and being in the moment of a conversation then opens up the path to intuition. It opens up the channel for intuition to enter into the conversation. This is why, and I love that we didn't even do the first question. Before, you're just like me, where I think it throws people off when they appear on the couch with me, because I don't send a show sheet. There's no preparation. That actually would go counter to the purpose of the show.
Who are you talking to here? Right. I mean, obviously we share the same philosophy here on this.
Right. And the thing is, and this is one of the things that drives me up the wall about podcasting in general, is I feel like a podcast is supposed to be a conversation. And look, even when I write, I'm just talking. I'm just having a conversation with myself and just putting it down on the keyboard. I don't go back really and edit my work. I don't have writing principles. It's really just my speaking style out into pixels. But the thing about the explosion of fantasy football podcasts, it's so wild that that's an actual genre in podcasts, is that most of it doesn't sound like the way we talk about football.
Oh my God. You're echoing what, so I kind of jokingly always tell, because a lot of guys that I work with, and by the way, caveat here, all fantastic, talented broadcasters, sure. But I always say I'm weaker with a show sheet. Yeah, sure. Let's have an idea of what we want to talk about. We're going to talk about who gained the most value from free agency. Like, we'll get to that.
Sure.
But it's so unnatural when, in my opinion, by the way, this is my opinion. There's other people that have different opinions on this, and they could be right for them. They just start listing out all these stats and this and that. And for me, when I listen to podcasts like that, I just glaze over. Now, that's just me. I know there is an audience for that. But the reason I started this podcast, Sigmund Bloom, was because I wanted to ask the questions and have the conversations with the people that I enjoy that weren't getting answered sometimes on podcasts. And then obviously have interactions with people like yourself who I just enjoy listening to, and kind of, because sometimes when you're doing your podcast, I'm screaming into my my AirPods, hey, what about this?
Right.
And then when you
no. I think it's just a question of just to go back to the larger point here again, and this is why I was not really interested in broadcast journalism as it was being practiced in the 90s, was everybody was trying to have the Midwestern accent, so you didn't sound like
New Yorkish. You didn't sound New York.
You didn't sound like you came from anywhere. You just
Boston,
sound like you came from nowhere in particular. And so on. And I think you still see it in big time media, that everybody is trying to blend into the delivery. It was so bad in the Syracuse Newhouse School. It did have the preeminent broadcast journalism program, and they like to do that stuff. For every one of you, 6 people got rejected and all that. But then you had all these people that were so focused on broadcast that their broadcast personalities and their actual personality just blended into one thing, to where you didn't even know where the real person was. I don't even know if they knew where the real person was, because the whole thing was about rounding off all the edges and corners so that you fit into this mold that everybody fit into, to eventually maybe get Bob Costas' job or something like that.
Dude.
And it's just, what's the point? And again, I think it's why we're lonely. I think one of the reasons we're so lonely is that out in the public sphere, in the market, we have to hold so much back of our humanity, and it makes it feel like we're in this desolate world where there's not a lot of humanity when there still is so much humanity. But all these forms of mass communication are meant to suppress that. And I want to be part of something that helps that grow again.
Yeah. It's whenever you talk about that you went to Newhouse in Syracuse, the broadcasting, I mean, that's the Harvard of broadcasting school.
Yeah.
My brother went there 10 years before you. He graduated in 88, I think, to there too. And he was in the school with Mike Tirico and all,
Sean
and
Gunn and blah, blah,
yeah,
blah.
yes, said the same thing you say there. It's like, he would observe it and just say like, these guys were, almost in the mirror talking like,
hey, Alan, how you doing today?
Morning Zoo. Morning
been
Zoo.
A great number of moves for us to thrills and chills with Calvin Ridley.
We should one time say we'll do a mock cast. A mock cast.
Yeah,
we'll do it yuck style. Yuck. Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the terrible Tuesday. 2-for-1 Tuesday.
Right.
Yeah. And by the way, I still love that kind of radio. I grew up in New York City listening to Z100 Morning Zoo, KTU, wherever there was a Z Morning Zoo in every market, right?
Did you actually get to listen to the Jerky Boys like on air?
All right, here we go. So Jerky Boys, for those of you who don't know, they were the ultimate prank callers, right? In the days where you had to have a cassette tape. So now, do I know that I know every one of I'm a Jerky Boys, like almost like I know Dice Clay's nursery rhymes. I yell them out as they're going.
Yes. That's great. Well, they come almost right out of each other, actually.
Yes.
That's great. It's funny when you said that Andrew Dice Clay was to do the cigarette,
best character of all time. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, all that stuff was a very fertile ground for creating ideas. So it was still a little bit of the Wild West then, and now I think it's all on lockdown.
Yeah. So just Jerky Boys. I don't want to tangent too, but what's the best Jerky Boy character of all time, in your opinion?
Oh man.
You want me to throw some names out there? Suggestive here? Is it Frank Rizzo? Is it
Sizzle Chest?
So yeah, I mean, he's got to be the number one, right?
That's the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
And then the thing is, like, there's also stuff that we're older now, we're more mature now. Societal mores and values have changed. Where there's some of the stuff that was really, really funny back then that now you look back on, you're like, yeah, that's maybe kind of problematic. I was even watching Bill and Ted, which is a pretty pure as far as it's
Entourage.
Oh gosh. Well, yeah, I mean, come on, Mark Wahlberg was behind that. So what do you expect?
I mean, that's 20 years ago. You couldn't make that today.
No. And it's good to ask a question. And that's not to say that's a bad thing.
No.
That's not to say that's a bad thing. But yeah, I mean, the Jerky Boys, I'll just say this. I was a freshman at Syracuse whenever the Jerky Boys tape was like making the round. And it was, I mean, I think what was great about it was always unexpected. I think even for them, sometimes it was unexpected. I think even for them, sometimes they would get so caught up in the bit that they would go over the line that they even thought that they would go. And it was exhilarating. It was exhilarating to be part of it because prank calling, isn't it sad that the kids will never know about prank calling?
You prank called as a kid, right?
Oh, I remember when Star 69 got introduced. I was like, oh, no.
For those who don't
do the prank calls anymore.
Let me explain what Star 69 is. So if you prank called, like you made these phony phone calls in the days before there was caller ID, the receiver of the call could hit star 69 and it would call you back, therefore revealing the camouflage of the anonymity of your call.
Right. And of course, the greatest television show ever, The Simpsons, had as a running bit Bart doing the prank calls down to Moe, who would take the bait every time. So yeah, what's wrong with a little petty vandalism, a little petty nuisance? It's all right. We're kids. We're testing boundaries.
Right. Well, I mean, did you do the Halloween thing, like with throwing eggs?
Yes. Cool corn. I mean, I was in Bentleyville, Pennsylvania, so it wasn't quite. I mean, there were people. Eggs was another level up, but I knew that eggs could hurt people's paint on their cars, so I was trying not to do eggs, but we did corn.
Smart.
But there was one year, Alan. I love telling the story. There was 1 year that all the people, all the responsible adults, all had some sort of system set up, and they were ready for us. And the first house that we hit with the corn, what a nice, satisfying sound.
Right, you hear the early ASMR.
You saw a bunch of people come out their house and start up their cars, and we all split, we all scattered. So they and that we didn't go out after that every year after that. But I will say that in New Orleans, and of course the city council is trying to stop this. In New Orleans, there's a Mardi Gras parade. It's the second Saturday. It's a Saturday before Fat Tuesday called Tucks, Friar Tuck, right? And they actually give out, well, their signature thing is toilet brushes and plungers, and they give out rolls of toilet paper, and then you throw your rolls of toilet paper that you get from the float into the trees,
right?
And then it's a beautiful thing, like every tree's a weeping willow, like so you're allowed for one day in New Orleans. You are
hooliganism.
Allowed to vandalize the city. Yes.
Yeah. We had in the chat a couple other Jerky Boy characters. We'll just throw them out there. Somebody had said Sal Rosenberg, classic.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. I mean, how can we have forgotten? And then someone else said Brett Ware, which is a great. Get Brett Ware, I said.
Brett Ware.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyone under 45, sorry, we don't
right.
need.
I mean, some of that stuff carried on with like Ali G. I mean, the spirit of it. Some of the stuff Borat. Like I think that some of that stuff carried on that spirit of just keeping everything in a unpredictable moment where you get people off kilter and see what happens.
Yeah. Right. Put people on uncomfortable situations for the amusement of everyone else. But yeah. All right. So let's what I'll do. I mean, I can go on like this, for hours with you, Sigmund Bloom, but I just want to circle back in. I'm selfishly, I brought you here today to help me out because I'm massaging the RotoWire Dynasty rankings a little bit. But I always value your input. So, and I'll give you a little asterisk credit if you persuade me here. Diontae Johnson, right? Mm-hmm. This is the classic, like was on a good team, gets traded to a bad team, but he's going to get a lot of targets. Are you more optimistic or less optimistic just for fantasy football about Diontae Johnson for just say this year, given all the circumstances around him in Carolina?
I don't know how you can be less optimistic. And I say this as a Steelers fan.
That's why I asked, by the way, because you're a Steelers
fans. Yeah. And the Steelers fan know that this was a relationship that was broken. I mean, this relationship was not salvageable. The trade return signifies that. That's why they got, I think, much less value than Diontae Johnson's actually worth, because it was common knowledge that this relationship had gone south. And
go ahead. Can you clue me in? Because I was unaware. I was asking people yesterday. I said, why did they trade a good player like Diontae Johnson? What was the fracture?
A fumble. Just, I mean, in a nutshell, he was unhappy about his role in the offense, and he let it be known. Because I think there are a lot of players unhappy about their role, and it's not going to fracture the relationship with the team until you take it public. And at that point, it's not going to be able to be repaired. Even him getting the original extension he got from the Steelers was not a sure thing, because when we think of Diontae Johnson, his ability to get open is unquestioned, but it's consistency. It's being on the field. It's staying on the field. Injuries, consistency of effort, focus, and things like that. But how could it possibly get worse when he's going from an offense? It's Arthur Smith's offense. It's Russell Wilson or Kenny Pickett. They're going to aim for 20 to 25 pass attempts a game. And Diontae Johnson is going to stay a malcontent. At some point, the relationship might have really fractured, I think, if he stayed with the Steelers. And then he goes to the Panthers. And he gets, now Adam Thielen is still there. So it's not as simple as just he's going to soak up, because there was a time last year that Adam Thielen was like a top 3 PPR receiver once Andy Dalton showed Bryce Young the way. Like, this guy gets open, even if it's just a 6-yard pass. Just keep throwing the ball to him if you don't see anything. I'm not trying to make a comment on his height when I said that. Anyway, so Diontae Johnson becomes that guy now who's automatically open. He's open early in progressions, and he's going to be the 80-90 catch guy for the Panthers. So I think it improves his stock, but he's going to be a free agent next year, and he's going to be 29, I think.
Something like, here I have him. Something like that. I think he's going into his age 28 season. I'll give you an exact moment, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, so the point is, what's he going to be worth? Now, the other reason I think the Steelers didn't get very much for him in a trade was the talk was the Chiefs were the other team in on him, and they didn't want to trade him to an AFC rival, which I feel like, okay, come on. Are we
Come on.
really
20
talking about?
he's going into his age 28 season. He's 27 and 7 months right now.
Right. So I think the question for Diontae Johnson is, how does he set himself up for a better contract next year? So this is good for Diontae Johnson, and possibly why he wanted to push himself out, because stats drive pay for the most part, and he's not getting the stats with the Steelers.
All right. So here's a classic like dynasty trade. If he goes off, if he's up, starts good, like he has an 8 for 80 in week 1. Or you know what? Actually, let me rewind that now. Would you rather have someone like him, age 27 and change, or someone like Jameson Williams, who obviously 23 years old but hasn't done anything really?
Yeah, I think that's Jameson Williams. Yeah, I think that's got to be Jameson Williams, because Diontae Johnson has already peaked as a player. Okay, we already can see that the market for him wasn't that strong in the trade market. So at least some of this, because there's also a world, Alan, where because the Panthers are the Panthers, they're gonna struggle. Maybe because Adam Thielen has tenure, Adam Thielen is going to get targets as much as he is. Maybe he's going to have some games where he only gets 2 targets for 15 yards. Maybe he hurts his hamstring again and then injures his hamstring upon return again. Maybe he doesn't go after a fumble like he did with the Steelers again. Maybe he starts to demonstrably show how unhappy he is in a game again. And now his name is mud in free agency. Now he's one of those guys that is looked at as potentially a net negative if you bring him in. So you have to really be careful no matter what he has on the football field. This is why. So I'm going to try to get on the positive side of being a Steelers fan here. Let's review the recent history of Steelers trading wide receivers and how it has gone for those receivers on their new teams.
Antonio Brown, Mike Wallace,
Chase Claypool, Martavis Bryant, right? So when the Steelers say we're out on a wide receiver, that should get also, or even Juju.
Interesting.
Even Juju Smith-Schuster, right? I mean, I'm not saying that the issues with Juju might be more physical than spiritual, emotional, mental. But so that's the thing when we're talking about Diontae Johnson's dynasty value. It's still very, very precarious. And it's possible that at no point for the rest of his career is he going to be a net positive for your fantasy team. That basically he's going to be somebody you plug in when you have bye weeks, injuries, emergencies, maybe in deep leagues. He's somebody that you start every week. But it's possible that he's not an every week starter again. Whereas with Jameson Williams, he's in a good organization. I mean, even just that simply, right? Who's going to look better a year from now? I don't even care who the players are, Alan. Who's going to look better a year from now? A player on the Panthers or a player on the Lions?
That right, Josh Reynolds or a player on the right, or whoever the wide receiver force. So, and even at least Jameson, because there's a lot of like dynasty players, long keeper league players that are out on Jameson Williams for good reason. He hasn't delivered on expectation, but he did show up in prime time in NFL games. I know like the number, that big run, he scored a touchdown. I mean, there's reasons to be optimistic. He's going to be one of the more polarizing players in like the best ball drafts. I mean, his price is only like 8th round, but interesting. In our keeper leagues, in our like dynasty format, Sig, I've noticed that 2 of the more polarizing players, like meaning like people are on opposite sides of them and they have hard takes, are Jackson Smith and Jigba and George Pickens. So we were talking about the Steelers. So starting with Pickens here, they move Diontae out. Russell Wilson presumably going to be the starting quarterback. How optimistic do you think that long-term dynasty leaguers should be with Pickens?
Yeah, and Pickens is another guy that at times is on the razor's edge of that. Is he a malcontent? Is he showing up the team? Is he a me guy instead of a team guy, right? But you saw him at the end of the year with Mason Rudolph. So if your narrative for him is he's a baller, he just needs a quarterback. Well, when Mason Rudolph was in, his numbers at the end of the year last year were astounding. And it's very possible, Alan, that, and hey, say what you will with Russell, say what you want about Russell Wilson in Denver. At least he revived Courtland Sutton's value. Courtland Sutton was a reasonable wide receiver 3 last year because of touchdowns, but regardless, he found him enough that his value was consistent enough to leave him in your lineup. So even if it is Russell Wilson, and there's a whole that's a whole topic we could unpack. Not that interesting, really, because the Steelers, again, are going to throw the ball 25 times a game, regardless. But George Pickens easily, very quickly, Alan, we might be talking about him in the same breath as Garrett Wilson, as DJ Moore. Very, very quickly if he is the focal point of the passing game, which, well, how is he not going to be now?
I made a terrible trade last year when I thought Pickens was more hype than actual, steak, more sizzle than steak. I added like my first round pick in my rookie league this year, 2 Pickens to get Chris Olave, who we remember last year we were saying, hey, he's the guy ready to ascend into the elite Justin Jefferson tier. Not such a good trade right now. How about Jackson Smith and Jigba? There's a lot of there's good reason for pessimism now that they re-signed Tyler Lockett, presumably at least for another year, probably 2.
Right.
So what do you think, like dynasty leaguers, should they be valuing JSN like the wide receiver one in this class last year, or is he just blocked in your opinion?
I think that this is the right time to buy him. I'll just say that. Right.
It's the lowest he'll be.
Yeah, exactly. It's the lowest he's going to be. I think he showed enough last year that I'm not out on him. And it isn't even like Jameson Williams where you're getting outward signals from the team that his development's not going the way they had hoped or planned it would. You're not getting none of that. I mean, he was on the field a lot as a rookie, and he showed he belongs on an NFL field. I think you're right to think that Tyler Lockett's going to be there for 2 more years. So now you've got this passing game split up among 3 players, and it's still going to be a team. I think Mike McDonald isn't going to change the blueprint very much. I don't think you're going to see this team turn into some sort of air raid team. So yeah, it's not great for Jackson Smith and Jigba looking forward, but is it great for Jordan Addison with Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy? Maybe. Is it great for Zay Flowers with I think you're looking at this, I hope, as a 2 tight end offense. Rashad Bateman says, hey, I'm still here. I'm a former first round pick. Derrick Henry says, I got 350 carries in me if you want. So is it great for Zay Flowers? Quentin Johnston. Well, I guess he's going to get it at the start, but he actually affirmatively showed us there are questions. But again, if you want Quentin Johnston, this is the time to buy him because of that. So
yeah, but they'll presumably take a pass catcher, whether it's a tight end or a receiver. You think it might be Joe Alt, the lineman, or something like that? Chargers.
What moves have the Chargers made this offseason to show us that anything but they're committed to them? This is like when Sean Payton took over the Broncos last year. And I know the Broncos took Marvin Mims in the 2nd round. I'm not saying the Chargers aren't going to take a pass catcher, but I do think that you're going to see. I'm putting together my winners and losers. Should be out this afternoon at Football Guys, in addition to my comprehensive report of everything that happened in the last 3 days. But I think one of the biggest losers, and I'm not saying like anybody could have foreseen this. Okay, you didn't need a crystal ball to say that Justin Herbert's value is going to go in the tank for now at least. Because
it's baked in though to ADP. It's like QB 13, QB 12, and underdog, so it's there. You're not overpaying for him,
right? But now we have confirmation, and we have confirmation of where this team is headed, what the priorities are for Jim Harbaugh. Their signature free agent was Gus Edwards. Okay,
like Gus.
Who is one of the biggest winners of free agency, by the way. It's just, if you allow me to go off extemporaneously. It's really interesting to me when I was putting together this list, Alan, talking about Dynasty fantasy football, right? Winners and losers. Number one, just if you put a chip in early best ball drafts, or you made some preemptive trades in Dynasty leagues on running backs whose futures were uncertain, just that group, you're much more likely to win than you were to lose. In fact, this year.
Yeah, which is all that matters in Dynasty and redraft. Right. This year matters.
Now, some of that could be because this is an underwhelming rookie class. But, when I look at my biggest winners, here they are, other than the Falcons offense: Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Zach Moss, Gus Edwards, Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs, Devin Singletary. These are all your biggest winners. And it isn't like when I look at losers. When I look at biggest losers, Alan,
of running backs, it's the Eckler, the unsigned guys.
Maybe Tyjae Spears, and that's even like was his role really going to be bigger than a 1A back, no matter in any scenario? So it's interesting to me that just we saw, if there's like a net running back value, when you add up the value of all the running backs in the NFL and Dynasty leagues, that number went up. That number went up significantly.
Yeah.
Because a lot of running backs gained value and very few lost value, and there's still jobs open, and there are still significant spots for the rookies. So it isn't like the rookie will wait for the rookies. No, the rookies are probably going to fill some of these spots that haven't been filled yet. So I think that's interesting looking back on this. Actually, maybe running back value, both in the NFL and in fantasy football, is rebounding.
Yes, and thank you for saying it, because this in the Dynasty Discord trenches on Reddit and all these places that I do not advise you hang out, Sigmund Bloom. They're disgusting sewers. Everyone's getting rid of their running backs. And they only want to draft wide receivers in their Dynasty startup drafts, and I agree with you. It's a function of the perceived lack of depth or the perceived elite level running backs. But meanwhile, what do we know about running backs? If they give it whoever running back one is,
Kyron Williams.
There you go. And there's Arian Foster. I mean, you can keep going. Like you can name all these guys that if they're in the right situation, and I'm just saying whoever RB1 is in this class, nobody knows who it's going to be. When that player lands with Dallas,
right, that
player is going to shoot up our rankings and be a top 8 Dynasty running back.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. And it's not crazy. Now, more often than not, when we reflect on running backs that we pushed up the draft board for our rookie drafts and dynasty leagues because of their situation, more often than not, we look back and say that was a bad bet. I mean, there's so many guys that we push up because Rashad Penny, right? I mean, we push up because of draft capital. We push up because of their situation. And then we say, yeah, that was bad. That was a bad one. But Kyron Williams is going to mess us up because Kyron Williams, he did not throw up the flag of a hit for measurables, like the models that a lot of people are doing a really good job with. But you plug in measurables, you plug in productivity, you plug in age, you plug in all these things, and it says, much more likely to be a hit than a miss, much more likely to be a miss than a hit. There was very little in Kyron Williams' profile that would have led you to want to invest in him, except that the Rams didn't really have a long-term answer on their roster.
Right.
So it's be agile and consider everything on a case-by-case basis. And most importantly, be ready to accept the new truth and the new reality before your league mates. And that's probably the most important thing in fantasy football. It's not getting it right from the beginning, because nobody gets it right from the beginning more than 52% of the time anyway. It's once you see that you're wrong, knowing that you don't need more evidence to be convinced to confirm that. Everybody who got in on Kyron Williams in week 2 or week 3 last year probably won their league because of it.
It's the Puka Nacua, how much should I bid on him situation, right? For those who bid 80% of their budget, you probably made a good run in the playoffs. For those of you who said, I'm only going to do a novelty bid of $12, you suffered the consequence. One more fantasy question before I spend the rest of my time with you, asking you a couple other things I have prepared. Sure. Every year there seems to be like a 4th round wide receiver that ascends into the elite tier and dynasty keeper, whatever. Cooper Kupp a couple years back, he was a 4th round receiver in our redraft leagues. Robert Woods went ahead of him. So is it obvious that it's Drake London this year?
Oh, well, I think George Pickens is interesting. I'm looking right now on the underdog ADP, and I'm looking at which wide receivers are going in that 4th round range.
Right. It could even be 3rd round, 5th round, but is it I'm talking about the player that has a chance to be in the Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb area next year.
Yeah, we consider him elite. I mean, absolutely. I think Drake London, it'd almost be more surprising if we don't. Just because it's always been there. The thing about Drake London, I mean, so I write my buy low, sell high article during the season, and it's morphed, Alan, into a buy high, sell low,
because it's not high enough. It's like buying Bitcoin when it was 40,000 and now it goes to 80,000, right?
I don't have any Bitcoin. So,
well, you know what I'm saying. You pay attention to pop culture,
Yeah, of course I do. Yeah, no, 100,000 is it coming? I have no idea. But with these players like Drake London and Kyle Pitts and Darnell Mooney, for that matter, they haven't gone up enough, right? So Drake London came in to a Falcons team 2 years ago and was immediately their number 1 wide receiver. And with terrible quarterback play, he was reasonably productive with Marcus Mariota. And he was their number 1 receiver. I mean, he was often drawing the best cornerbacks in his first year. And he was more than up to that task. And last year, if you watched him play, the reason his statistics suffered had nothing to do with his quality of play. There's nothing you can point to and say, well, yeah, Drake London still needs to develop in this and this and this area. It was the offense. It was Desmond Ridder. It was Taylor Heineke. It was not Drake London, Arthur Smith. It was not Drake London. So I think it would be more surprising if we still look at him the same now in a year than if we look at him like we do those guys. And I think George Pickens is a guy that we need to pay attention to, as we talked about. I want to come up with another potential name or two.
Would you take like Drake London or Tyreek Hill in like a dynasty keeper format? So that's like the pay me now versus pay me possibly now and more later.
So I'll say that from a psychological standpoint, my first instinct is to say, ooh, let me think about it.
But this is a dynasty question.
Tyreek Hill can still... Right. Let me think about it, because I know that whatever Drake London's going to do, he's still probably not going to be as important to winning fantasy teams as Tyreek Hill this year. But upon reflection, Alan, when I think about getting to these kinds of forks in the road in the past, the right answer is almost always the younger receiver. It's almost always the younger receiver. There will occasionally be, your Larry Fitzgerald, Jerry Rice, whatever, your wide receiver with longevity that exceeds expectations. But generally, as we see wide receivers getting to age 29, age 30, age 31, getting out while they are still perceived to be among the elite. Like, just Davante Adams. Like, how has Davante Adams' stats haven't necessarily suffered, but how has the trade value suffered? And then what's it going to be like with the Raiders and Gardner Minshew? I guess it was okay for Michael Pittman last year, but you get it. So yeah, I think at this point, I would probably want to be on the Drake London side of that trade. But if someone came to me and said, I got offered Drake London for my Tyreek Hill, I would say counter and ask for some picks and something.
Like something on top of it.
Sweetener, yeah.
All right. So we're going to pause. Sigmund Bloom, you're always generous with your time. I won't keep you too much longer, but I just want to pause our fantasy football conversation because I wrote down a couple of questions that I've been dying to ask you here. Okay. I just, the topic of AI is in the world. It's, it's a buzzword, but what do there's people that are scared of AI, right? Just like there was people that were scared of the internet. Do you remember when there was a time where nobody would make a credit card transaction online because you thought, that was the end of your life?
Right.
What is your feelings on AI as maybe even relates to like what we do for work or just the world in general? Should we be scared of it, embrace it, or you still waiting?
But there's so many things to say. I think the first thing to say, specifically as it relates to our jobs and the world we're in, is good, because the more sites, the more places that use AI generated content. And look, I think AI is good for research. Okay. I think AI, and we've already been using it maybe without realizing it, using Grammarly or different things that check your, or even just the auto spell correct and the things that give you a little red underline when grammatically your sentence as you're typing it doesn't quite. So we're already using it for formalistic things. We're already using it for things that don't involve judgment, pattern matching type things. It's really good for that. Okay. Some of the things that are exciting about AI, like in the medical field, about reading, and I'm not saying we don't need radiologists, because there are certain things that just come with experience and training that no AI could simulate, but just being able to use AI to do more quote unquote objective type things, finding cancers and scans and things like that where human beings aren't, that's exciting. But when we start trying to use AI to replace things where the special sauce is the creativity, some sense of a human spark, something that takes you back to your nature as a human being and reminds you of it, then it's going to wither. It's going to wither, and eventually people are going to wander the desert, and when they can find that oasis of humanity again, that's what they're going to come back to drink. So I think that for those of us like you and I, Alan, that don't know any better than to be ourselves, I don't know how to be like somebody else. I don't know how to blend into the sports media sphere and just sound like everyone else and say the kinds of things everybody else says the way they say them. It'll just make us stand out more. Yeah. And I think that in the long run, it'll be good. Go ahead.
I was going to say that they used to say this back when farming, like when everyone was like
Sure.
picking crops by hand, the tractor, oh my God, the tractor is going to come take our jobs. No, all it did was it created tractor repairmen. It created people that needed to know how to ride the tractor. It makes the monotonous, redundant tasks easier. Like in the world of video editing, where I am, is like there's AI tools that will cut clips, but those clips are like, they're B- level clips. I have to go in there and massage them and open them up a little bit and add this, put the chop this piece, put it in front of there.
Right.
So it takes the redundant labor out of it, and it could make life easier. But like you said, the creative human element, there's the clips that I put the TLC into are the clips that perform well for whatever that word means. And the ones that are just straight AI, those just kind of everybody sniffs those out.
Well, here's when you say, are we scared of AI, or should we be scared of AI? I do think that intuitively we understand that when we start to offload important things to automated functions, bad things are going to happen, right? And even more so, if we give agency to artificial intelligence, it will eventually decide that we are superfluous, that we are, right? How many stories? Skynet, right?
Skynet, Terminator stuff.
Sure. But there's so many. Dave, I'm afraid I can't let you do that, Dave.
What was that? That was a Stanley Kubrick movie, right? Yeah,
that's 2001.
2001.
There's so many stories we've written about, even like Dr. Frankenstein's monster. Even as a good Jew, like the Golem, right? That you make something to perform some purpose, and then it turns. It's the Sorcerer's Apprentice and Mickey, right? I mean, this is in our DNA. Like, we understand that our technology will outpace our ethics, so that it will expose these gaps, and it will, and we will have a day of reckoning. I think that's very possible. I think War Games, that was my favorite movie when I was a kid.
The Matthew Broderick movie.
Oh yeah,
like, good one.
Nice game of chess. It's all over our stories that we tell about ourselves. So that's one thing that I think it is scary about AI. But then on the other hand, there's like WALL-E, where like some form of artificial intelligence is actually going to preserve humanity better than humans. So that's one side of the discussion. And then we get into the capitalism side of the discussion.
Well, what's going to drive that is porn is going to ultimately drive.
But I want to say I saw something that like actually early testing on that, because Mark Folletti and my buddy Mark Folletti, who I did Draft Guys TV, all kinds of stuff with back in the day, who in some ways is part of the story of how I ended up in this chair talking to you right now. We talked about like, wow, what a script treatment would be like when they can actually truly simulate sex in a way. Like, will everybody just unplug completely from the world? Like, will it just make the world ripe for conquering? But I think the early things are like, there's something human, that some sort of human need that needs to be satisfied that maybe isn't. It isn't something just as simply as like eating because you're hungry. But the other thing that scares me about AI, where I was going to go with the capitalism thing, is where there is a reason to be scared, is that the amoral, not immoral, amoral nature of capitalism is that where there's profit to be sought, they will try to harvest the profit. And probably labor costs are one of the last frontiers of where you can harvest profit at this point. So yes, they will try to replace human beings as much as they can. And in some cases, go for it. I saw, and I don't want to offend anybody that has an MBA. I hope if you have an MBA, you're using it to make the world a better place and enriching yourself and your family at the same time. But and I saw something that was like, well, AI can already ace MBA exams, right? Well, what does that show you about the sophistication of thought that is being used in typical MBA type operations? So, it goes both ways, where if part of AI is like realizing that all this middle management is unnecessary and it's just theater where people try to create justifications for jobs that aren't needed. I mean, it can help, but there's going to be an early ugly part where they're just going to, everybody who's coding, good luck.
Yep.
Good luck. This coding, because you can even see it in healthcare professions. My wife, the love of my life, Kate, is a speech language pathologist, and part of the reason she did it was because her dad convinced her Well, those are good jobs, right? When we were coming up, healthcare jobs were good jobs, safe jobs where you were helping people, jobs where you got good benefits, right? I mean, it was a good, safe, smart, prudent thing to do with your career. And now a lot of the healthcare jobs are horrible. This has been like 44% of doctors say that if they knew back then what they know about the profession now, they wouldn't have become doctors, which is terrible.
Which is obvious, because anytime you go in to see a doctor, you don't even see the doctor, you see the PA or the nurse. You don't get to see anyone.
And they just have to go around and it's like billable hours, like lawyer stuff.
It's a meat market.
And I think that for coding, again, there was a time over the last 5, 10, 15 years, around the time I was doing systems analyst stuff, like that was smart. It was smart to learn coding. It was smart to learn the latest language. It was smart to learn whatever the next thing around the corner was. And a lot of people have gotten very wealthy doing that. But I think that one of the first applications of AI is going to be to just completely replace that part of our workforce.
Well, you say it's so funny because when AI first came about a year or 2 or 5 years ago, that whole the talking about it, people said, oh, it's going to replace all the blue collar people, the truckers. You're in trouble, truckers, right? We're going to have a civil war because the truckers are going to hold up the highways.
Yeah.
Right. So, but meanwhile, it's not. It's the white collar workers that are in trouble. Right.
Yeah.
It's very ironic how that happened.
And since you opened up this can of worms, I don't want to spend, God, I could do hours and hours on AI. I mean, let's be clear too, because this is where the philosopher in me that says, not so fast. What is intelligence, right? Because what is AI right now except a lot of very fast supercomputer level calculations about pattern matching in language.
Internet scraping.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
AI is not intelligent in the sense that it doesn't understand anything about what it's telling you.
Right. And that's why it tells you the wrong things at times too.
Right. Or hallucinates, which is
interesting.
Fascinating. It's fascinating that they even use that word hallucination when
very interesting.
But it hallucinates because its answers are only as good as the source material that it chewed up. And a lot of that comes from humans with agendas or what's really bad about this.
Right, like the Gemini debacle with Google when you asked about who the founding fathers were, and it put out all these different multiracial people.
And in fact, you can even see how easy it would be to come up with a master plan to game AI and to get AI to spit out things that you intentionally wanted to spit out. But where we get to, again, about being scared of AI, and maybe it could be good in the long run, the death of the internet, right? The death of the internet is when we have, instead of the human centipede, look it up if you don't know about it, you have the AI centipede, right?
Best movie ever, by the way.
Right. If AI is just if its nutrition is other AI, which is all based on flawed stuff to begin with, how do we ever find our way out of that cycle? Right? How do we ever get back to stuff that came from human beings? We'll see. But the good news is, over the history of humanity, they've been trying to do this the whole time. I mean, power and money and influence have always been concentrated in people that wanted to keep it forever. And look at how far we've gotten already. Our ancestors stared down and defeated way scarier things than AI or insert blank. For us to be here and have the freedom to sit here and talk about fantasy football sometimes for some part of the show.
Yeah.
So I'm still optimistic in the spirit, the soul of humanity to, in the end, triumph in the ember, no matter how faint it gets, will eventually turn back into a flame, but we have to find our way there. And that's the test. We're going to be tested. And, I'm just glad I'm 48. I mean, I remember there was a point when my dad started saying, well, this is going to be your problem. And that's kind of where I am in my life when I look at the challenges that are coming for Earth.
Well, and yes, and I think that every generation says this, end of the world. We often talk about this, like you hear some people say, look, racial relations are horrible right now. But wait a second. They're way better than they were 60 years ago.
Yeah.
If you're a person, let's just say you're an African-American person, would you rather live now or in 1948? The answer is, and nothing's perfect. You're Jewish, right? I'm Jewish. I'd rather live right now than in 1944 for obvious reasons in Poland. You know what I'm saying? So things are getting better. If you look at them from the 10,000 foot view, they're not getting worse. And I feel the same way. I'm optimistic about AI. Last question I have for you, Sigmund Bloom, and then I'll let you get out of here. This is perfect. So we grew up in the midnight. We spent our age 15 to say age 30. So adolescent to young adult in the early to 90s to like early 2000s, just say, right? Is there any other time period that you'd rather spend those 15 years in other than the early 90s? And there's, you can take that anywhere you want to go, but you can go down it. So what time period, what decade would you like to live those most memorable years in?
Oh, I mean, for me, this is too easy, right? Probably some time if I would have turned 15 around 1960.
Interesting.
Or so.
The hippie in you, the
hippie, the civil rights, the giving your life over to some cause greater than yourself. And it wasn't even just civil rights. I mean, if you look in the late 60s, it was worldwide. It wasn't just the United States. And it was, there was Native American power, women's liberation. There was so many movements of burgeoning political consciousness. And as Hunter Thompson put it, rest in peace. He's not resting anywhere, though. There was that moment in 1967 during the Summer of Love when it looked like maybe we were going to win for once and for all. Now in my old age, I know that the answer isn't who wins, because no one ever wins. It's the tension that creates the spark that turns the wheel of history. And no matter what it looks like, give it long enough, then it'll flip back over. But at least there was a moment that it seemed like all of these, I don't know how to describe it, right? Just that force out there that wants things to be ordered and productive and looks at every breath we take as just something that's supposed to make a dollar come out of a slot somewhere, even if the dollar ends up back in our pocket. Like, that can't be what this is for. That can't be why we have this flicker, this gleam in our eye. And in the 60s, I think in this country, there was a moment when it seemed like maybe they might be able to end the Vietnam War, to dismantle these structures of power. And to your point, it was way more intense than it is right now in our country, even though the rhetoric might seem intense and the mass media might create this feeling of intense. I mean, we had students occupying buildings on colleges and taking a college president like hostage and bombings.
The United States government told people they have to go fight in Vietnam.
Your friends, my mom would tell me, may she rest in peace. My mom would tell me, like, she had friends that went off and died, and the people who came back probably wish they were dead. Millions. Like, but and I think to really sum up that question when you ask it, it's just what it felt like. What you're doing matters. What you were doing then mattered. And then after the 60s and all this stuff died down, it was the 70s and it was malaise. Well, first of all, the 70s looked like it was a lot of fun to be a young adult, like adult in your like late 20s and early 30s. But also, like, if you just started doing something, Ben and Jerry were just like deadbeat, whatever. Well, I don't know. Let's take a correspondence course on making ice cream. They happen to live in Vermont where the milk is good. And look what happened. They weren't entrepreneurs, they weren't motivated, they were just two dudes that needed to figure out what to do with themselves. And it seemed like in the if you grew up in the late 60s, this is why I always curse the boomers, right? You just had to do something, anything, and look what happened, right? Now I think the deal, that square deal, isn't around anymore. And I think also it's hard to feel like what you're doing matters. And this is where I'm going to again make a plug for New Orleans, because for all the terrible things that are going on in New Orleans, my city that I love so much, I promise you folks, this message brought to you on behalf of the city of New Orleans, if you come down here, whatever field you're in, you're going to make a difference right away, right? If you're in some place that's prosperous, if you're in some city that the real estate values are going up and so on and so forth, and there's a lot of good schools and a lot of good doctors and a lot of good whatever, then if you weren't doing your job, someone else would just step in right behind you and do it the same way that you were doing it. But down here in New Orleans, if you come down here and you do a good job, you're going to change lives. You're going to change lives. You're going to see just how powerful your presence on earth is.
Sigmund Bloom, I could do this with you for hours.
Yeah.
But to be continued, right? Be continued.
Always. Down here, we don't say bye. We say see you later.
Right. Bye for now. Bye for now, right?
Yeah.
It's not bye, it's bye for now. I understand. But okay, follow Sigmund Bloom. I'm sure you already are at Sigmund Bloom on the social media platform formerly known as Twitter. Do you like that? Instead of calling it X or Twitter, it's formerly known as. It's like Prince, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
What's the piece of work for football guys that you want, one piece of work that you're working on or you have out right now that you want people to pay attention to?
Well, again, like today, if you're on the newsletter or if you're a subscriber, you'll get just my overview of the last 3 days and what matters and why it matters, over like 100 items, one for every team. The Cowboys finally did something. So one for every team, at least one for every team. And then I'll put my 10 biggest winners and losers for fantasy football. And then I'll be working on the Bloom 100. And if you're like me and you love your deep IDP leagues, rookie drafts and dynasty leagues where it's mixed and you have to weigh IDP value against offensive value and so on and so forth, always working on that. And what's great about it is, I mean, there's so many other people doing similar great work out there. So it's a bonanza.
Similar, not the same. I can tell you that right now. I read everything that's out there. Bloom, you're doing some unique stuff, believe it or not. Your takes, your energy is very unique in the space. So I'm not going to allow you to call it the same.
Thank you for that. I need that.
Well, it's the truth. It's the truth. What was the last thing I was going to? Oh, you know what? Because I put Saquon Barkley on the thumbnail. There's been a little bit of debate, just lightning round.
That was my answer. See, we're coming all the way around to the question that was supposed to lead things off. You promised, Alan. You said we're going to lead off with this.
I know.
Which player has gained the most value?
I did deception. You know, I said, look at this, and the card is behind my back.
Trick.
So Saquon Barkley, the best value up guy in free agency.
Yeah, it has to be. And let people quibble about how many rushing touchdowns is he going to get, how many targets.
A lot.
Let them quibble about that, because he has never run behind this kind of offensive line. He has never been in a competent offense in the NFL. Yep. Okay, so we don't know how good he can be, and that's my favorite kind of player to have in fantasy football.
Yeah, I mean, in my redraft leagues, I'm going to be taking him pick 4. I mean, that's just I know I'm not
Bijan Robinson.
Yeah. This is the peak season for him. Bijan is probably going to be a great pick too.
I just coaster in you though. Is that like because he's in Philly? And
I live in Florida now. I have no allegiance to anyone except the Jets. You know, I mean, Jets and Jaguars, I guess. But and maybe I'll be wrong. It just seems like this is the situation. This is McCaffrey going to the 49ers that we needed.
It's a Jets fan, isn't it perfect that just when they're actually starting to make some decent moves with the offensive line, now we're getting like the real Aaron Rodgers. Although Woody Johnson probably loves it, and they hang out anyway. So,
but by the way, so you think that Barkley, like going after Lamb, McCaffrey, Chase, that's too high? You think?
I don't think that's too high. I mean, I think that there's definitely an argument for him to be the number 2 running back, and I think that the question of which wide receivers would you take the number 2 running back over is a little bit tougher. I mean, I think Lamb, Hill, Jefferson, Chase. But speaking of maybe Amon-Ra, although Amon-Ra we know is not going to just go absolute crazy the way that Lamb did at the end of the year last year, for instance. I think that I brought up Bijan. I think the other guys, of course, is Breece Hall.
Yes, you know what? You're right about that. Breece Hall should be number 2. I take that back.
But either way, the point is, if you draw number 6, 7, 8 in your draft, that's when you're thinking about Saquon Barkley, and he's another buy high. It's just that there was even a debate. I thought initially there was a debate about whether it was a good thing for Saquon Barkley to end up on the Eagles. That buy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you get. I think this hurts Jalen Hurts the most. Less tush-push touchdowns for him. You know, no Jason Kelsey there. You know, we'll see. It's very interesting. We'll continue that over the summer. All right, Sigmund Bloom, thanks again, and we'll see everybody next week with another Dynasty-focused fantasy football podcast.